It was supposed to be a normal Thursday afternoon in Willow Creek, a quiet, picturesque neighborhood where lawns were trimmed to perfection and mailboxes gleamed under the sun. The community thrived under the strict gaze of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a board known for micromanaging everything from fence heights to the color of seasonal wreaths. It was a place where appearances mattered, reputations were everything, and problems were handled quietly. Out of public view at precisely 2:43 p.m., that illusion cracked. Ethan Miller, a shy 10-year-old boy in Mrs. Crawford's 5th grade class at Willow Creek Elementary, came home from school with a red mark across his face. His mother, Sarah, thought it was an accident at first, maybe a fall during recess or a playground scuffle. But Ethan didn't say much. He simply walked to his room and shut the door, leaving behind a silence heavier than any noise. Later that night, when his father Mark gently asked again, Ethan finally whispered what had happened. Mrs. Crawford, his teacher, had hit him. The reason was absurd. A misplaced homework sheet, a frustrated teacher, a bad day, and a moment of temper that spiraled into something ugly. The slap echoed louder than anyone could have imagined, though only Ethan had felt it. Sarah's heart sank as she listened. Shock turned to anger, and anger to disbelief. Mark, level-headed and methodical, wanted to handle it the right way. He sent a calm email to the school, expecting an immediate apology or at least a meeting. But the next day, the school's tone was distant, cold, and defensive. They called it a disciplinary misunderstanding. Mrs. Crawford, they said, had redirected Ethan after he became disruptive. No admission, no apology, just bureaucratic words designed to deflect. Sarah refused to stay silent. She posted about the incident in a local parents group online, not naming names but hinting at what had happened. Within hours, the post caught fire. Parents began sharing stories, whispers about Mrs. Crawford's temper, her history of favoritism, and how complaints disappeared after meetings with the principal by morning. Sarah's post had hundreds of comments. Some were supportive. Others warned her to take it down, for her own good. And strangely, a few commenters mentioned the HOA, saying things like, "Be careful. The school's under their umbrella." It didn't make sense at first. What did the HOA have to do with a public school? But when Sarah received her first letter, a formal notice from the HOA, it started to become clear. The letter, written in stiff legal language, accused the Millers of creating community unrest through defamatory statements online. It claimed their behavior violated Section 4, Article 7 of the HOA's Civic Conduct Clause, something no one in the neighborhood had ever heard of, and attached to it was a fine. $250. Sarah was furious. Mark was stunned, but they didn't pay. The following week, another fine arrived, this time $500. The wording was harsher. It accused them of spreading misinformation harmful to Willow Creek's image. And at the bottom of the letter was something even more chilling, the HOA president's signature. Linda Crawford. Mrs. Crawford's sister. The connection was hidden in plain sight. Linda Crawford, the HOA president, and Mrs. Janet Crawford, the teacher sisters who had long controlled two of the most powerful institutions in the neighborhood, the HOA and the elementary school. Together, they formed a wall of silence around their reputation, a shield that deflected criticism and punished those who questioned them. Mark realized the stakes immediately. This wasn't just about one slap anymore. This was about power, the kind of local power that thrived in quiet suburban corners, protected by paperwork, gossip, and intimidation. The Millers began to notice strange things. Their mailbox was left open at night. Their trash cans, perfectly aligned for years, were found tipped over and scattered across the driveway. A note, scribbled in pencil, appeared on their doorstep. "You're making it worse for your son." The atmosphere shifted. Neighbors who once waved now looked away. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with private messages. People claiming to know more, but afraid to say it openly. A few hinted that the HOA and school shared more than leadership. They shared finances. Digging through old newsletters and budget reports, Mark discovered something disturbing. The HOA had been donating large sums to a community education fund that, as it turned out, directly paid for certain programs at the school. programs managed by Mrs. Crawford herself. It meant one thing: the HOA wasn't just protecting the school. It owned part of it. The more they uncovered, the worse it looked. The HOA had influence over staff hiring, resource allocation, even school event planning. Everything ran through a tight circle, a network of board members, teachers, and trusted parents who kept each other's secrets. When Sarah emailed the school board, she received no reply. But the next day, a car slowed down in front of their house. Inside, a woman filmed their property before driving away. Later that evening, another HOA letter arrived, citing property violations. They claimed their porch light was non-compliant with community standards. Another $100 fine. Mark laughed in disbelief. It was absurd. But Sarah didn't laugh. She felt the walls closing in. Every day, Ethan grew quieter. He didn't want to go to school anymore. He avoided eye contact, avoided noise. The slap had done more than sting. It had silenced him, just like his parents were being silenced now. But Sarah refused to let them win. She began documenting everything: letters, dates, car sightings, even the smallest interactions. She created a private folder labeled Proof. She didn't know what she would do with it yet, but she knew she'd need it. Weeks passed, and the HOA fines piled up. Neighbors started to whisper that the Millers were troublemakers. A few brave ones reached out quietly, sharing their own stories: fines for gossip, threats for spreading negativity. One older couple confided that when they tried to speak out years ago, their house was mysteriously vandalized, and the police couldn't find any leads. It was clear now. This wasn't just an HOA enforcing rules. This was a network built on control, using intimidation as its tool and respectability as its disguise. And the Millers had just become their latest target. Still, Sarah wasn't afraid anymore. She had lost her patience, but not her will. When the next HOA letter came, a formal warning that further public discussion could result in community disciplinary action, she did something they never expected. She sent copies of every letter, every fine, and every note she had received to a local journalist. By the next morning, the story was out. The headline was short, but explosive: local HOA accused of silencing parents after teacher assault scandal. And as reporters started calling and cameras began to appear, the quiet perfection of Willow Creek began to crack. Because beneath the manicured lawns and freshly painted fences, something dark had been hiding all along, and the world was finally starting to see it. The morning after the article went live, Willow Creek wasn't quiet anymore. The once pristine neighborhood, known for its morning joggers and silent sprinklers, now buzzed with whispers, cameras, and tension thick enough to choke the air. A news van parked by the entrance sign: "Welcome to Willow Creek, where community comes first," capturing footage of the neighborhood's perfect lawns. Reporters walked up and down the street, trying to get statements from anyone willing to talk. But most doors stayed shut, blinds drawn, silence replacing the usual friendliness. The Millers woke up to the sound of tires on gravel and voices in their driveway. The local paper, 2 regional TV stations, and an online outlet wanted comments. Sarah's hands shook as she spoke to one journalist, holding the stack of HOA letters like evidence. She didn't want fame. She wanted accountability. But once the cameras rolled, she realized how deep the fear ran. Not just in her, but in everyone around her. By noon, the HOA released an official statement online. It was short and cold, denying all accusations and accusing certain residents of spreading false and harmful claims intended to damage community harmony. Attached was a PDF listing the HOA's achievements: school donations, safety patrols, neighborhood beautification projects. IT painted them as saints. But behind that perfect image, the machine of retaliation had already begun. That same evening, their internet went down. Then their mailbox was jammed with flyers accusing the Millers of attacking community integrity. They were anonymous, printed on cheap paper, stuffed into every mailbox on the street. The next day, Sarah found their car tires slashed. The police came but barely looked interested. One officer muttered something about civil disputes and keeping the peace. When Mark tried to show him the letters, The officer shrugged, said it was an HOA matter. That phrase, HOA matter, became a curse. Within a week, 3 of Mark's clients from his landscaping business suddenly canceled their contracts. 2 lived in Willow Creek. One texted him quietly, "Sorry, man, they told us not to work with you." Meanwhile, Sarah was receiving strange calls. Silence on the other end, sometimes faint breathing. Once, a woman's voice whispered, "You should have just paid the fines." Ethan was now refusing to go to school. His teacher, Mrs. Crawford, hadn't been suspended. In fact, she was still teaching. The principal called it pending review. And when Sarah confronted the school district, they said they were aware of the situation and working closely with community partners to ensure fairness. The community partners, she soon realized, meant the HOA. Behind the scenes, the 2 organizations were moving in sync, like 2 hands of the same body. The school controlled the narrative and the HOA controlled the pressure. Together, they created an invisible cage around anyone who dared to speak. One night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, her eyes red from exhaustion. She had documented everything, photos, emails, timestamps, but she knew the system wasn't designed for people like them to win. The HOA had lawyers, insurance, and local officials on their side. Then came the letter that broke her composure. Notice of foreclosure proceedings, non-payment of HOA fines. It was official-looking, stamped with the HOA seal. They claimed the Millers owed $3,150 in unpaid penalties, and failure to comply would trigger a lien on their home. Mark nearly tore it apart in rage. "They can't do this," he muttered, pacing the room. But the truth was they could. HOAs had power, terrifying power. And in Willow Creek, that power was being abused by people who knew exactly how to hide their tracks. That night, Sarah stared at her reflection in the dark window. Beyond it, she could see faint headlights. A car parked across the street, engine idling. Watching, it stayed there for hours. The next morning, she found a new note taped to their door. It was written in the same pencil scrawl as before. "Stop before Ethan gets hurt again." The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike. But the message was unmistakable. Sarah's knees went weak. Mark wanted to call the police again, but Sarah knew what they'd say. "Without evidence, there's nothing we can do." Instead, she called the journalist who had first broken the story. The call went straight to voicemail. Then, a few hours later, she received an email from him. It was apologetic, distant, and vague, saying the paper was pausing further coverage due to ongoing legal considerations. They'd gotten to him too. The next HOA meeting was announced a few days later. Normally, these gatherings were dull, discussions about lawn regulations and pool maintenance. But this one drew a crowd. Over 30 residents filled the community center, buzzing with tension. Sarah and Mark sat in the back, watching as President Linda Crawford entered with her usual icy grace. She thanked everyone for attending, smiled for the cameras, and began her speech about community unity. But beneath the polished words was a threat, subtle but clear. She spoke of outsiders stirring trouble, of people seeking attention at the expense of our peace. Every glance she cast toward the Millers was like a dagger. When the floor opened for resident comments, Sarah stood. Her voice trembled at first but grew stronger with every sentence. She laid out everything, the fines, the threats, the silence, the fear. She didn't name names, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. When she finished, the room was dead quiet. For a brief, hopeful second, Sarah thought maybe, just maybe, people would speak up. Then Linda smiled and said, "Thank you for your input." No one else spoke. The meeting moved on as if Sarah's words had vanished into air. Afterward, a few neighbors approached quietly, whispering that they believed her but couldn't get involved. One slipped her a folded paper before leaving. It was a printed email chain between Linda Crawford, the school principal, and 2 HOA board members. The email subject line read, "Handling the Miller situation." The messages discussed legal options to suppress defamatory actions, and even mentioned monitoring school-related behavior. They spoke like conspirators, cold and strategic, treating a family's suffering like a PR crisis. That was the proof Sarah had been waiting for. She scanned and uploaded the entire chain to an anonymous cloud account. Then, using a burner email, she sent it to multiple news outlets and a local parent advocacy group. She didn't sign her name. She didn't have to. Within 48 hours, it was everywhere. Screenshots flooded social media, hashtags trended locally, and even national reporters started calling. Suddenly, the HOA and school board were under public scrutiny, a spotlight they couldn't control. But with exposure came backlash. That weekend, the Miller's car was vandalized again, this time spray-painted with the words "liars" across the side. Their front door was egged, their lawn torn up overnight. A neighbor's security camera caught hooded figures running off, but their faces were hidden. Sarah sat on the porch that night, watching the flashing lights of police cars fade into the distance. The officers said they'd file a report but couldn't promise anything. The air was cold, the kind that seeped into bones and stayed there. Yet, beneath her fear, something else was growing: resolve. The HOA could threaten, the school could lie, and the neighbors could stay silent. But she wasn't done. Not yet. Because now the entire country was watching. And Sarah knew that if she wanted to bring them down completely, she'd have to go deeper, into the records, the finances, and the secrets that had kept Willow Creek's mask shining for so long. The storm that followed didn't come with thunder or rain. It came with headlines. Within days, the leaked emails spread beyond local news. National outlets began covering what they called the Willow Creek scandal, a tangled story of a suburban HOA and a school district working hand in hand to silence parents. Every new article uncovered another layer, another connection, another abuse of power. But inside Willow Creek, it was chaos. The HOA board scrambled to do damage control. Press releases went out daily, denying everything, calling the leaked emails fabricated. Linda Crawford stopped appearing in public, though her husband was seen removing boxes from their house late one night. The once perfect lawns of Willow Creek now felt haunted, their manicured beauty mocking the ugliness beneath. Sarah watched it all unfold from her living room, exhausted but unrelenting. Each morning brought a new wave of attention. Reporters on her lawn, supportive messages from strangers, and hate mail from anonymous locals. Her inbox was a battlefield of sympathy and rage. Ethan, meanwhile, stayed home from school indefinitely. The district had promised an investigation, but no one had reached out. Mrs. Crawford was on leave, though the school refused to clarify whether she'd been suspended. Sarah didn't need confirmation. She knew the district was stalling, hoping the noise would fade. But it didn't. Parents from neighboring towns began contacting her. They shared eerily similar stories: disciplinary cover-ups, intimidation, strange letters from their HOAs whenever they complained about the school. Some even claimed the same management company oversaw multiple HOAs connected to the same superintendent's office. It wasn't just one neighborhood's corruption. It was a web vast, careful, and profitable. That's when Sarah realized this wasn't just about her son anymore. It was about exposing a system built to silence. Mark, though weary from months of fear and retaliation, supported her every step. Together they compiled everything: financial records, donation trails, minutes from HOA meetings, even photos of HOA members attending school district events. With the help of an independent investigative journalist, they pieced together the puzzle. For years, the Willow Creek HOA had been funneling community improvement funds into educational programs, money that the school board used to bypass district regulations. In exchange, the school gave the HOA influence over local projects, staffing recommendations, and disciplinary discretion. The relationship was symbiotic and corrupt. Sarah and Mark handed their findings to the state education department. First, there was silence. Then, 2 weeks later, subpoenas began to arrive. The first went to the HOA office. The second, to the Willow Creek Elementary Administration. The third, to Linda Crawford herself. When the news broke, everything changed. Residents who had once avoided the Millers now approached with quiet apologies. Some brought food, others offered help. People who had kept their heads down for years finally started talking. Hidden stories poured out: threats, lies, cover-ups. It was as if a dam had burst, and truth was finally spilling into the open. the HOA tried to retaliate one last time. They issued a statement revoking the Millers' membership privileges and filed a motion to foreclose on their home for non-compliance. But this time, the world was watching. The state attorney's office intervened before any paperwork could move forward. Days later, news cameras captured the image that would define the scandal. Investigators walking out of the HOA's headquarters carrying boxes of documents, followed by Linda Crawford, escorted by 2 officers. Her face, once composed and untouchable, was pale, blank, and defeated. It turned out she wasn't just protecting her sister. She'd been embezzling HOA funds for years, masking the theft behind education contributions and community initiatives. The slap that started everything had uncovered far more than abuse. It had revealed an empire of deceit. For the first time in months, Willow Creek was quiet again. But it wasn't the peaceful quiet of before. It was the silence that follows destruction, when everyone is still processing what's been lost. The HOA board was dissolved. A temporary administrator was appointed to manage the neighborhood while the courts sorted through the mess. The school superintendent resigned. Mrs. Crawford was officially fired, pending criminal charges for child endangerment and falsifying reports. And the Millers, the family who had been fined, threatened, and isolated, suddenly became the symbol of resilience. Reporters called them the voices that broke the silence. Advocacy groups reached out. Parents from across the state thanked them for speaking out when no one else would. Yet, beneath the vindication, there was still pain. Ethan didn't talk about that day anymore. He avoided the subject entirely, focusing instead on drawing and helping his father in the garden. The scar on his confidence would take longer to heal than the one on his cheek. Sarah, though proud of the outcome, couldn't shake the exhaustion that lived in her bones. Winning didn't erase what they'd endured, the fear, the nights awake listening for footsteps, the endless waiting for the next blow. But she knew one thing. Silence had almost destroyed them, and she would never let that happen again. Months later, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Willow Creek, the neighborhood looked different. The lawns were still perfect, the mailboxes still identical, but the illusion of harmony was gone. Behind every fence and every smiling face, there was a new awareness of what had happened, a shared knowledge that this place had once been ruled by fear. The HOA sign at the entrance had been removed. In its place stood a simple wooden board with handwritten words, "A community rebuilt on truth." Sarah drove past it every morning on her way to work. She didn't feel triumphant, just at peace. The system that tried to silence her had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. And though it started with a single slap, one moment of cruelty hidden behind classroom walls, it ended with a reckoning that reached far beyond any one family, teacher, or HOA. Because in Willow Creek, silence had been power, until someone finally refused to be quiet.